Hey guys, we're going to start talking about square root functions, and we're going to focus a lot on domain and range again, and some of the behaviors with square root functions. So for A, we're going to go ahead and we're going to use a calculator, even though it says not to. We're going to use a calculator with the graph. So clear out your graph and then type in the square root of x. And then we're going to check the table. Now let's say do negative 10 for g. We're going to focus mostly on the center of the graph, mostly around 0, but we'll look at some of the values around from negative 10 to positive 10. Now for this one, we have points for f of x at 0, 0, 1, 1, and then if we move down, we have 4, 2, and 9, 3. So I'm going to put those in. Now it's important to remember, like the picture illustrates, graph starts here at 0, 0, and then as it goes to the right, it does keep going, so you're going to want to draw an arrow only on that right side. There is no negative x values. Now if we go ahead and go back out and do x plus 3 minus 2, square root of x plus 3, then you got to press the right cursor to get out from underneath, and then minus 2. You're going to see there's going to be some changes. I'm going to go back to the start of that, and what you're going to notice is that after negative 3, negative 2, all those x values have errors. So there is no answer for those domain values. So if we started our table at negative 10, like this question, like B says, you're going to see that there's a bunch of values that have error next to them. So those are values that aren't in the domain. So I'm going to go ahead and put a few points in. I'm going to do this one in green. Okay. I know this one right here, I'm going to mark this f of x. And then we'll do next one g of x. So we got negative 3, negative 2, negative 2, negative 1. And then I'm going to go ahead and move down my table, find a couple more points. Looks like we got 1, 0, and 6, 1. So 1, 0, and then 6, 1. I'll go ahead and draw. And then again, that again is going to have an arrow on it. I'm going to label it g of x. Now, they want us for the next part, state the domain and range of each of the function using set builder notation. So, in this case, the domain and range, you want to focus on that initial point that we started at. So we're going to, for the domain and the range, we're going to go ahead and write in, it's pretty much an inequality. Now we talked about doing interval notation and inequalities. For the domain values for the original one, we have, if I move this back up, we have x and y at 0 for the start of the graph, and then the x values go greater and the y values go greater. So if we're talking about part C, for the domain, you're going to have x is greater than or equal to 0, and y is greater than or equal to 0. You can also use interval notation, which in this case would be, we have 0 up to infinity, and similar for the y values, you have 0 to infinity. So there is options. You could do either one will work. Just be careful with the infinity, make sure it's around because there's no actual infinity value. Now for g, if I move this back up, our starting point was negative 3, negative 2. And the same thing, the x values and the y values are going larger. So we'll have x is greater than or equal to negative 3, and y is greater than or equal to negative 2. And similar, same thing like we did here with the, you could do that, or you could do negative 3 to infinity, and negative 2 to infinity would work as well. So that's kind of a couple basic square root graphs, square root functions. Now we're going to move on, talk a little bit about domain and range. You can try exercise 2 on your own. just to kind of give you an idea of what the different types look like. Now for exercise 3, they're asking about which value does not lie in the domain. So that means if it does not lie in the domain, that there is no value in the range. So we're trying to figure out which of these values gives us a range value that's an error. So if I was to take my calculator, turn it on, go to y equals, and then type in the function. Looks like it's x minus 5. Go to the table. Looks like right here I have errors for 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then all negative values. So based on what I see, it looks like 2 is going to be the answer because 2 is the one that has an error in my table. Now kind of moving on from there, if we're going to determine the domain for each of these, and they says show the inequality to justify the work, similar to what we just talked about, I'm going to do C, and then you can probably try A and B on your own. So try these. I'll do C. I'll go take the calculator out. I'm going to type in the square root of 8 minus 2x. I'll erase the print on there and do second graph. And it looks like here we have errors for 5 and everything above it. 4 we have an answer, a 0, and then it looks like all the values are going to the left. So we have an answer at 4 for our x values for the domain, and everything less than 4. And again, you could write it as an interval by doing negative infinity to 4, a bracket on the number 4, and then a parenthesis on the negative infinity. Now the last one we're going to look at is exercise 5. And they want us to do a little sketch. So we're going to look at part A for this. We're just going to do the sketch of this function, kind of get an idea what it would look like. So if I go to y equals, and I type in what we have x squared plus 4x minus 12. Okay. And then do second graph from there. So now based on what I see, you have a lot of error values. Up until negative 6, we have negative 6 to 0. And then it goes up and to the left. So it's going to do something like this. And again, it's just a sketch, so we're going to just focus on a couple key points. We have no answers for those values in the middle. And then we start at 2. And looks like our line goes up and to the right, kind of curving a little bit. So that would be kind of our sketch for this function. So we're going to hold off on part B because we haven't talked about a quadratic inequality yet. So with some of the questions as you get into the assignment, look for those domain values and range values. And if you don't have a y value, there's an error. That means that that x value isn't part of the domain.